me okay? So my name is Sean Tucker. I'm a faculty member here at the U of R in Business Administration, and my area is Occupation Health and Safety. Here to talk about a trend in work fatalities in Saskatchewan that's emerging this year that's pretty concerning. And so I'm going to take you through some of the statistics today, some insights into what may be going on in Saskatchewan, and then end with recommendations and then discussion. So I want to acknowledge that we're meeting today on Treaty 4 territory. This is the traditional land of the Cree, Saulteaux, Dakota, Nakota, Lakota, and the homeland of the Métis people. And we're all treaty people. I also want to acknowledge that several people have supported this research in different ways over the years. And I want to thank all the safety professionals who are doing incredible work in Saskatchewan right now. What we see in the statistics this year is not a reflection of our work, not the reflection we want to see of our work, let me put it that way. But I'm just really impressed about the folks who are working in the field, from the safety associations who are here today, from folks at Workers' Comp who are involved in injury prevention, from Federation of Labor speaking out about health and safety, and workers who are on health and safety committees in workplaces and advocating for safety. So just a brief overview of the talk. I'm going to begin with some statistics on sort of trends on fatalities, sort of break work fatalities down in different categories, compare Saskatchewan's fatality rate to other provinces. Next, move to some observations about what's likely happening here in Saskatchewan, and then end with recommendations and discussions. So these slides will be available on my website, or if you email me, I can send them to you. And there's also, U of R is making an audio video recording of the lecture, so I'll make sure that gets up on the YouTube page and spread it around. So please share this with those who might be interested. So this presentation focuses on fatality trends and a lot of stats, but stats really mask the human face of the topic. And this year, to August 31st, 37 workers have died on the job, or died because of work in Saskatchewan. Most times, those deaths are not picked up in the media. They're not reported on. We don't know the names of most of the workers who've died on the jobs, especially those who die of an occupational disease. Humboldt Broncos bus crash, there were 6, I don't have them all represented here, 6 workers that were hurt in that crash, in addition to the players. So they're included in our statistics this year. I want to highlight 4 stories here, 4 stories for give you a sense of who we're talking about here today. And when we talk about workplace fatalities, the sort of scope of them. What you don't see up here is any farmers. Farming fatalities, we have 12 to 15 a year in Saskatchewan, are not included in Workers' Compensation Board statistics. So they're not there. I'll begin with the one I don't have a picture for, but this was reported in Moose Jaw last week, and has been reported, I think, in the press today. So Adam Van Hatten was 29 years old. He was a father of 4 children. He was employed by Elite Eavesdropping, and he fell off an 8-foot roof he was working on onto a concrete walkway. He died. He was not trained. He did not have fall protection and trained how to use it. And so there's a family without a father, right? Chad Sprackman, right here in the lower right-hand corner, 18 years old, died after getting caught in a shredder at Surecom Industries, tire recycling plant north of Saskatoon. Another worker was injured at the same workstation about a week earlier. The company did not replace the jam-prone shredder or add an emergency stop cable until after the death. Cad was a recent high school grad, and he was looking forward to going to film school. Eric, and I have some difficulty with his last name, Eric Nabdemashini, is a 21-year-old employee working for a subcontractor at the Children's Hospital, New Children's Hospital in Saskatoon. On July 21st, 2016, Eric was killed when a steel construction lift fell on him. He was also pursuing a career in acting and was widely loved in the community, and there was a great outpouring after this incident at the hospital. Robert Durain. This is a story that many of you will probably know from this year. Robert Durain was a grader at a rural municipality in Saskatchewan. He was bullied on the job by his coworkers. His employer, the rural municipality, did not carry out their responsibilities under the legislation, and in fact treated the concerns as they were quite trivial. Robert took his own life, and the Workers' Compensation Board, in adjudicating the claim, stated that Robert experienced interpersonal incidents that were excessive and unusual in comparison to the pressures and tensions experienced in normal employment. Further, that there was sufficient information to attribute Robert's mental health issues and his subsequent passing to his employment. Those are just a few of the faces of workers who have lost their lives in Saskatchewan. So, just want to say a few words about the data that I'm going to be presenting to you. They're from different sources. So the Saskatchewan Workers' Compensation Board is a primary source of data for today's talk. The Association of Workers' Compensation Boards of Canada, so the AWCBC, they gather injury data and fatality data from all workers' comps across Canada and compile it and present it on a public website. And the Alberta Ministry of Labour provided some information on fatalities in Alberta to the end of August 31st this year. The data is incomplete. The data I'm going to be presenting for this year is to August 31st, 2018. There have been 37 fatalities that have been processed as WCB claims in Saskatchewan this year. 31 have been fully processed and categorized, and I'll get into that in just a minute. And I just one other caveat that this is preliminary analysis that I'm presenting today. Another thing you should know about workers' compensation data, which is the source for serious injury and fatality statistics, is that it only captures injuries and fatalities among workers who are covered by the WCB. So Saskatchewan, approximately 71%, it changes by a couple percent each year, are covered by workers' comp. So another way to think about this is nearly 3 in 10 are not covered. They may be self-insured, so if you're a teacher, or as Darren's reminded me, as faculty members, we're not covered by workers' comp. We have our own insurance here at the university. But we're not captured in WCB statistics. So agriculture is largely not included in our WCB statistics. So when you think about 37 fatalities, nobody's really represented there from agriculture. Our coverage rate's a bit lower than other provinces. So Alberta's is 84% of workers are covered, 77% in Manitoba. So 37 fatalities, work fatalities, in Saskatchewan as of August 31st. Now let's put this into perspective here. Here's the total number of fatalities, annual fatalities in Saskatchewan between 2008 and 17. So we're sitting at 37 today. We had 27 last year for the entire year, 31 the year before. One thing I would note here is that during the economic boom in Saskatchewan between 09 and about 14, there was a significant increase, obviously, in fatalities in the province. And I would attribute that to unprecedented economic growth and people being stressed and fatigued, and also at times a lack of enforcement and oversight in workplaces. After 2014, 15, 16, 17, fatalities have dropped more to a number and a rate that would be common in the past. And this year we're seeing a spike, and I am not one to say where that line is going to go, but it's going to be higher than 37. Workplace fatalities are made of two broad types, so occupational disease, and this gives you a sense of a number by year for occupational disease. So workers been exposed to workplace carcinogen and they succumb to cancer later on. And then the yellow line is injury-related fatalities. Now, injury-related fatalities can be broken down further, and I'll walk you through this next graph here. It seems a bit busy, but occupational disease is the gray line, and that's the number here for those. We've also got heart attack in the blue line, and you can see it really spiked in 2012, but has remained relatively low over time since then. Heart attack would include overexertion in the workplace, or somebody just dies at work of a heart attack. That would be included in the WCB claims. Traumatic events, and I'm going to focus on this throughout the talk, this is the green line, are relatively stable. They vary a bit by year, but they're fairly stable. And if we look at the last 3 years, we experience about 9 of these a year. And these are due to someone falling off a roof without fall protection, being crushed at work, something, or a shredder, what have you. So they're traumatic events. Motor vehicle, this is the orange line here. We see some variation here, but generally quite a few of these in Saskatchewan each year. And I followed the news a couple weeks ago. There was yet another situation with people on a bus. Thankfully, nobody was killed. Two or three were seriously injured. Several were hospitalized. So those are part of the picture as well. And then finally, other category. So this would include workers who maybe experience a traumatic event at work and then succumb to those injuries later on, or due to an infection or something, or suicides would be in there as well. Okay. What we can see here is we've got 18, which we're just we're talking about August 31st. We can see that traumatics are motor vehicle and occupational disease are all higher, and as well as the heart attack. So all the categories seem to be relatively high for this time of year. It's also important to consider the trends over time. And so I've looked at 3-year average number of fatalities for each of these categories between 2010 and 13, and then 14 and 17, and look at the percentage change over time. Try to identify some trends. This is what we want to do, is identify trends and figure out what would be an appropriate intervention. And so you can see that for the 14-17 period, there was a decline in 3 of the 5 categories. Traumatic stays relatively stable, okay? 8.89 traumatic work-related fatalities per year. and other doesn't change at all. We can also look at fatalities by industry and type between 2008 and 17. And so the WCB has broad rate code categories, so building construction, government, municipal, transportation, warehousing, development, mineral resources, road construction, manufacturing, processes, and then another category here. So things that sort of stand out to me here is the number of traumatic fatalities in some sectors, so building construction, and there are certainly issues in residential building construction in Saskatchewan. Right, Colin? Like
yeah,
that's a
half times.
Yeah. Government municipal, we see a relatively higher number of occupational disease, so that would be related to first responders, firefighters who are exposed to asbestos in the course of their work or some other carcinogen. Motor vehicle accidents, road construction. Higher here we had, I think it was back in 2011 or 12 when we had an incident at a construction site where somebody was in a hurry and they went around traffic and they killed a flagger there. I think many people remember the tragic, I mean, it got a lot of publicity. Tragic circumstances. Young woman just started on the job. She was pregnant and she was here with her fiance from New Brunswick for work. And in response to that, there was Ministry of Highways and the regulations around signage and construction zone really picked up, right? I think the lesson from that, I'm going to come back to that, is if we want to change our reality, we can. We can change our reality. We can take action. We've seen it with that road construction response there. Photo radar, signage, speed bumps. We can do it. It's not impossible. It's a matter of will. So let's turn now to a comparison of Saskatchewan's fatality numbers to Alberta and Manitoba. And I want to say a few words about these stats. One thing we do is we calculate the fatality rate so that we can take into account the different size of the workforce among these jurisdictions. And I'm using data from the AWCBC. So they accept a fatality, they accept the Workers' Compensation Board decision on a fatality, they just accept that. Now, different jurisdictions have different, definitions of what a work fatality is. So some jurisdictions, Manitoba, has what's called a right to elect clause. If you're seriously injured or killed in a motor vehicle accident, you can get benefits from the auto insurer and not WCB. And in that case in Manitoba, that if it's a fatality, it doesn't show up in Manitoba's WCB stats. Okay? Some jurisdictions have presumptive clauses. So if you worked in if you've got a certain cancer and you worked in a particular occupation, that's a high risk, there's no need to adjudicate the claim in any detail. You worked there, you have that cancer, we presume it's from work. So those differ from province to province. And there's some other differences as well. The AWCBC has two broad categories, injury and occupational disease, fatalities. And I should note that Anya Keefe and I have posted an annual report on fatalities. It's there to compare provinces. The one thing with this data is that there's a 2-year lag before it comes out. So all I can show you is up to 2016. So if we compare Saskatchewan to Alberta, Manitoba in terms of its rate, fatality rate for occupational disease, we see that Saskatchewan is, kind of clustered fairly close together with those other jurisdictions. This is a rate per 100,000. We look at the injury-related fatalities, so motor vehicle, traumatic incidents, heart attacks, and others. We see Saskatchewan since 2010 has been consistently higher than Alberta's rate. And I have a caveat here. Manitoba, I don't think they're a fair comparator here because I think a lot of their motor vehicles end up off the records. They're on different records. So this just changed in 2016. I suspect Alberta and Saskatchewan's 2017 AWCBT rates are probably pretty close. But what's happening in 2018 this year? Are we tracking with Alberta? Well, we can look at this using the data we have. It's an imperfect calculation, but it's still enough to work with. So using the number of full-time equivalent employees that are covered by the WCBs reported in their annual reports in 2017, we can come up with a denominator for our rate calculation. So 1.8 million workers are covered by WCB in Alberta, and 423,000 in Saskatchewan. We've had 37 work-related fatalities as of August 31st. Alberta's had 100 fatalities. 34 are injury-related, and 66 are occupational disease. So Alberta is 4 times larger. Its covered workforce is 4 times larger than ours, right? So we want to calculate a rate and see. And we're on track for quite a significantly higher fatality rate if we're combining disease and injury together here. I haven't parsed them out, but we're on track for a higher rate here. This is 62% higher right now, Saskatchewan over Alberta, 62% higher. So some observations. I should say that the data here are from the Alberta Ministry of Labor. I was in contact with somebody there. So our injury and fatality data tell 2 different stories over the past decade, and this will be a surprise to folks who are working in injury prevention. They tell 2 different stories. One story, which gets a lot of coverage, is our lost time injury rate, and this is the blue line here. It's expressed per 100 full-time equivalent workers. It's gone down steadily over the years. Yeah. So one story is lost time injuries, and that story is often told that we're getting safer and our lost time injury falling. A lost time injury is an injury that results in the worker unable to make their next shift at work. Okay, so they miss their next scheduled shift at work. That would count in the WCB stats as a lost time injury. Our fatality rate tells a different story. If we are getting safer, the fatality rate should trend with it, right? It's not. And since 2009, you can see the slope has kind of gone the other way. Now I'm missing 17, 18 here, but this gap is larger than the gap here, right? So there's 2 stories here. So what's happening? And I should say the fatality rate, that's the occupational disease and injury fatalities together, combined there. So what is happening here? Well, if we look at the average lost time injury duration in days, what we see is Saskatchewan and Alberta are trending upwards. The average number of days per lost time claim is going up, which would indicate more serious injuries on average. This analysis was recently done by the WCB looking at serious injuries, which they define as a percentage of impairment, 10% or more, a number of lost time days. I would just focus on the number of lost time days, 50 or more. That's sort of where most of these fall. And they noted that serious injuries make up approximately 8% of all lost time injuries in Saskatchewan, but account for approximately 72% of all lost time days. This is key here though. The annual total number of serious injury claims has remained largely unchanged. It goes up by 100, down by 100 a year, but it's roughly around 2,300 a year. Okay, now, I don't have a rate. If I did have a rate, I'd put it on this graph here. But I think what it would show is something like this. And you'd have to work with the y-axis, but from here on, I mean, it would be going down slightly, but that slope would not match the time loss injury slope. So we've got fatalities are historically high. We have serious injuries not changing much, the number of them, although the rate will be going down ever so slightly because the workforce is getting bigger, right? And we have these injury rate, which is steadily going down. So what's happening here? Well, this is not my commentary. I can't take credit for this because it's when you have a drink with anybody or go out for lunch with anybody, this is what you'll talk about. I'm serious. I mean, I think this is getting to be fairly common to talk about this among folks is, okay, did we just get better at return to work? Which is a good thing, I'm not slagging return to work. It's a good thing. Did we just get better, especially at large employers, at bringing people back to work so they didn't miss their next scheduled shift? Did we just get better at that? And we have gotten better at that. So how much of that improvement can be attributed to, or how much of the decline in lost time injuries can be attributed to these improved return to work practices? Don't know how to answer that question. Some people estimate 50%, some people say 70%. I don't know. I think it's higher than 40%, because I know some large employers who are they've got plans in place and they manage claims very carefully. So are Saskatchewan workplaces safer? Well, I have witnessed firsthand, and I know safety professionals in the room here, safety associations, you've seen these dramatic turnarounds in organizations, right? It happens. We've seen some, like they really develop a strong culture. And I've, in consulting work I've done, I've seen it. It's not overnight, it takes several years, but it's done. And many have made improvements in the province. But we can't ignore the statistics. We simply can't ignore them. The number of serious injuries has remained pretty constant. 9 traumatic fatalities per year since 2008. And then we're faced with this increase this year. Another thing that gets talked about when safety folks get together is culture. It's like, what's the underlying problem here? Why Saskatchewan? Why is it this way? And I find often we end up talking about culture. We talk about education and knowledge and training and those things, right? They're important. But somewhere along the line, the conversation will go to culture in the province. And how our norms are such that many kind of believe in sort of jumping in and getting the work done. And even though I'm fatigued, I will keep going at it. And I'm not going to take time to do this because I want to get it done. Don't know how to assess that proposition, but a lot of people cite culture as one of the reasons for the high fatality rate in the province. Here's results from a survey that I conduct, and the sample is 14, 15-year-olds who are required by law, if they want to work, to take an online education test, which I'll speak to in a minute. This statement, this question is situated at the beginning of that, so they haven't taken any of the content. And so we've been doing this since 2015 to 18. We get about 9,000 to 10,000 14, 15-year-olds a year reply to this survey. And about, the bottom line is about a quarter of 14, 15-year-olds think that it's normal, that workplace injuries are normal in Saskatchewan. And it's a bit higher if you parse out urban versus rural. Rural's a bit higher, about 29%, 22, 23% in the urban areas. Higher among males, lower among females. So the implication of this belief is that there's an acceptance, right, of injury. There's a lack of motivation to do anything about it because you just assume it's normal, it just happens. And a fatalism about it too, right? This just happens. This just happens in my province. There's, thing. So this is the only sort of window I have into culture. People talked about, well, we put this in 2015 into the survey. I'd really like to do more work in there to kind of pin this down. Is this really the issue? How big a problem is it? So how do we change culture? Well, there's not one solution. I'm going to try to focus on some gaps here and mostly big picture. And this is not exhaustive in terms of recommendations. And I do want to acknowledge the work that the safety associations are doing in the province with training, with outreach, with involvement in other safety organizations. I know you're going flat out with things for showing up at events like this today. So there's a lot going on there, and in discussion, if you want to jump in and talk about what you're doing, that would be, I think, great. So I'm going to keep it big picture. It's not exhaustive, but I'll take you through a few things where I think there's some gaps and we could do a bit better. And I'm going to draw on some examples and approaches that and practices that other provinces have used, which I think we should take a close look at. So we've got an emphasis on youth in Saskatchewan. And the idea is there to provide injury prevention knowledge in schools, develop those norms and that culture in schools, and that will spill out over to the workplace, and that will be part of changing the culture. Totally agree. I think that's a good approach. There's many different school-based programs. The one that comes to mind first is Saskatchewan Safety Council Career Safety Education Program, and that's an online program for kids. I mentioned the survey that we use, and it's embedded in this Young Worker Readiness Certificate course. So if you're a 14 and 15-year-old in Saskatchewan and you want to work, you need to take this course, pass it, print a certificate that says you passed it, get your parents to write you notes saying, we agree, allow you to work, and take that material to your employer. And you can work in prescribed workplace. You can't work in an underground mine or anything like that. But so we have several thousand youth who take this each year. I think our efforts on youth are important, and I'd like fully support continuing with this. It makes a lot of sense. But when I was thinking about this talk, I was thinking about, well, what happens when we send young people into workplaces with poor cultures? Like, how far can this go to help them? And they may take it, this is very prescriptive, but the reality can be quite different, right? So are we asking a bit too much of them? And what else could we do to add to this youth focus to make it more effective, I think? And I think we need to do more work on public awareness of OH&S rights, responsibilities, and the basics. It's not enough to give this information to youth, send them out into workplaces. I do a poll sometimes in my undergrad class, and how many people know your basic rights? Not many people know, and they've all been through the Young Worker Readiness Certificate 5 years ago, 6 years ago. Okay, we'll go through the Saskatchewan Employment Act and OH&S regulations. Key things like supervision training. Not many know. Literacy is really low in my experience, with some key provisions in the legislation. And so we're talking a lot to youth, which is good, but I don't think, and I know the associations are talking a lot to employers and supervisors, but only the ones that will engage with you, right? What do we do for the rest? I think we need more public awareness about OH&S rights. I think we need to target messages to employers and supervisors. The language in the law is strong. I mean, for training and supervision, it's strong language, there's no doubt about it. I wouldn't recommend changing the language there. I think we just have to let them know that this exists, because I'm not convinced that supervisors and many employers do know. Because if that employer eavesdrop company in Moose Jaw knew, they wouldn't send the 29-year-old up there with 4 kids on the roof without a harness. They wouldn't do that. So we really need to do this. Basic rights, the right to know about hazards in your workplace, the right to participate in controlling hazards in your workplace with an occupational health committee, and absolutely the right to refuse dangerous work. I don't know why we don't have public service announcements on this. We do need to do that. I run through simulations in my OH&S class, in the legislation on right to refuse dangerous work. And any time I'm invited by a colleague to speak in a class, I will go through that, and not many kids know it. They just don't know it. So there's a gap there. This is what I'm saying, there's a gap. Let's see here. BC, WorkSafe BC this summer had like ads every time you turn on the radio. They had ads about basic rights. We could do this. We could do this. I don't see a downside to it. I only see an upside to it. I know there's some work, Lori, I don't know if you speak to this later. I've heard about a partnership between WorkSafe and SFL on getting these rights out, but I mean, we need, I think, be really visible about this, because we got a crisis right now in our hands, and so I don't know why we would sit on all this good stuff. We should get it out there. And in fact, the 3 basic rights, Bob Sass, many of you know, developed these in Saskatchewan in the early 70s. You know, and then they kind of diffused across North America. So we really need to kind of pick it up, I think. The other thing too, and this is, the legislation is strong. The only thing that I'd really like to see changed is the amended so that workers could refuse dangerous work on behalf of a coworker. It doesn't allow that right now. It's only refusing work that could hurt you or somebody else that you're doing, that you've been asked to do. And I think it's consistent with the legislation. Just bear with me for one quick moment. I'm almost wrapped up here, but yeah, I mean, the basic duties in our legislation, every worker while at work shall take reasonable care to protect his or her health and safety and the health and safety of other workers who may be affected by his or her actions or omissions. Why wouldn't we make this amendment? It's something we should do, because we have a crisis on our hands. And there's a lot of young people, mostly young males, who are seriously injured and killed. And it's early on in the job. They just don't know. They wouldn't know that it's unusually dangerous. They wouldn't know to use the right, even if they knew they had the right, sort of thing. So let's let a senior worker who's a mentor step in. A lot of this happens informally in the day-to-day shop floor. But why not? Why wouldn't we do it? Andrew and I were talking about this, Andrew Stevens and I. We definitely need to be communicating in other languages to significant number of foreign workers who have arrived in Saskatchewan in the past decade. Manitoba, as you can see here at the bottom, they provide a translation of key documents on their WorkSafe site. Now, this is something we should do. It's something we just really need to do. And I hear from employers, I hear from safety association folks that this is a gap, and we need to have like a broad, I think, approach to this. But we're putting these workers at risk, like with not communicating with them in their language and that. The basics, even the basics. We've got new materials on asbestos, about asbestos. I think the gap there is the public awareness about asbestos. I'm still surprised when I'm talking to students, they don't know about asbestos. And there'd be, in a class of 20, probably 5 that either worked in construction or know somebody that works in construction, like residential renovations and that. And that's just like, so that's easy prevention work to do there. We've got the resources online, other places. We just need to like be more public about it and let the public know. Another gap is, and we're getting better, I think, here on some of this, is the public awareness about serious injuries and fatalities. In Alberta and other jurisdictions, they'll post quarterly updates on the number of fatalities. Even more detail on what industries they occurred in, no names, but they'll have more information there. And so this is something that's not our current practice, but I think would be good, given that we've had elevated levels of fatalities. And then more attention to the serious injury rate, because I think there's enough questions now about that lost time injury rate. We need to look at the serious injury rate, fatalities, and lost time rate, but look at these 3 and see how they're moving together. When you go on the Ministry of Labour Relations and Workplace Safety website, the goals that are stated in annual plans and reports are related to time loss injuries. And it would be good to have fatalities and serious injury rate in there as well, just so that they're tracked. On the enforcement side, there's been a lot of work at the OH&S division, training for officers. So these are the folks that get called out because somebody calls in with a work refusal, or there's some complaint, or there's a serious injury or fatality. They go out and investigate, and they prepare an investigation file, and when it's finished, they send it to the Ministry of Justice, to the prosecutor there. So we've had improved training for occupational health officers in investigation skills, because employers are challenging these charges in court. The past 2 years, we've had 8 new occupational health officers added to LRWS, and I'm told the total, there's 64 there now. We need more federal OH&S officers, so rail, banking, anything that's federally Canada Code regulated. Our officers don't go to those sites, so we have 1 officer in Saskatchewan for federally regulated companies, and we've had a number of fatalities in rail yards in Saskatchewan, a number. 1 officer. So that's something else we need to do, is get on the Federal Minister of Labour and bring this to her attention. Police training for OH&S criminal charges. This goes back to the Westray amendment to the criminal code. Several jurisdictions now, Alberta was recent, they'll bring in experts to train police on how to use the criminal code for incidents where there's evidence, where there's wanton disregard for worker safety. And I don't think I don't believe we've done that in Saskatchewan yet. We do blitzes, inspection blitzes of, say, residential construction, but we don't publicize them all the time. And I personally believe there's a deterrence benefit to publicizing blitzes. You'd agree, Colin? Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
And we don't do it, but we should, because we do it for drinking and driving and other thing. We tell the public, hey, we're going to be stopping you for this, and you just get a bigger bang for your buck, right? And then there's targeting strategy, so more focus on injuries, serious injuries in the workplace. So to date, between April 1st and this is the fiscal calendar for LRWS, there's been over 2,300 inspections of workplaces between April 1st and August 31st this year. Officers have issued over 2,300 reports. They've sent 14 files to justice for prosecution. 15 prosecutions have been initiated. And they also have issued summary offense tickets, which I'll get onto in the last slide here. So prosecution. So an officer has prepared a report to to hand off to a Crown prosecutor. And the legislation in Saskatchewan was amended, significantly changed in 2014 to increase the maximum penalty in Saskatchewan for a death or serious injury to $1.5 million. It used to be $300,000 maximum in Saskatchewan. We're seeing penalties raised slowly over time. The Shercon decision, which was January of this year, was a $300,000 penalty plus $120,000 for victim surcharge. And the judge said in sentencing, the fine I've assessed, I believe, sends a message that safety in the workplace must be more than a set of laminated instructions, common sense, managerial admonishments, respecting rules. It must be the creation of an attitude and culture where safety is paramount. Basically said you put profits ahead of, it was very clear you put profits ahead of this guy's life. The Crown prosecutors told me that they are appealing a couple of recent decisions. I assume that it's because the penalties were not high enough. And the last piece on prosecutions, which I wanted to highlight, the summary offense ticketing. This was brought in a few years ago. It's meant to address the backlog of cases in the Ministry of Justice. There are, unfortunately, so many fatalities in this small province that the prosecutor's office has a lot of work on their plate. And so they were meant to bring about compliance for contraventions that maybe didn't result in death, but could, death or serious injury. Sort of like parking tickets. There's 12 offenses, different penalties, highest for employers, $1,000, $600 for supervisors, I believe $250 for workers. And so we've issued, LRWS has issued 14 in the current fiscal year. But it'd be great if we could see more of those, because they're just a nice tool to kind of get people's attention. To my knowledge, there haven't been tickets towards workers. It's mostly employers, and I think secondarily supervisors that are getting the tickets. So anyway, that's I think that's, I'll end it there and then open it up to questions and discussion. And again, thanks for coming. You know, I really hope I don't have to do this talk again in 2 years, because I don't like doing it at all. This is not a fun thing to talk about, and we really got to get our act together in this province. So with that,